Steve Hoffman, thank you so much for joining us on the Happiest Retirees podcast.
I'm super glad to be here. Surprisingly glad to be here.
Well, tell us a little bit about your story. You're not retired per se, and you may not ever want to, in that sense, in that classic sense. But tell me, like what you do and what you've been doing and what you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had sort of a wandering professional career. I got my degree in French, ancient Greek, and English, and so that required me to actually find a job. I was qualified to not do very much to make actual money, so I became a handyman. I worked in real estate for a long time, and then at some point, my mother-in-law had a tax business that she wanted to hand off to somebody in the family. I seemed like a weird candidate for it, but in the end, it worked out really well. I really actually liked the kind of, I'm kind of a funny dual brain person. I really like, language, literature, kind of the arts and humanities, but I also have a very kind of linear way of thinking about things. And so the tax preparation side of my life actually worked quite well. It was, memorize a bunch of rules and apply them. And I was good at it. And compared to real estate, there was a very short sort of effort reward, turnaround. Whereas real estate, you could show people, 100 houses and they might never buy one.
Yeah.
With tax preparation, I have a client across the desk from me. An hour later, we're done. I submit a return. They pay me, and that just sort of suited me well. So that was great, and everything was going beautifully. But there's this other part of me that it was always, again, sort of interested in creativity and the arts and languages. I speak French. I've spoken French for most of my adult life. And at some point, we decided to go to France back in 2012. Took our kids. Our kids had gone to French immersion school in the Twin Cities. They spoke French pretty well, but we wanted to kind of cement that, and we put them in schools in France, in French, in a tiny little winemaking village in southern France. I'm just about to publish a book on that. I'm publishing a memoir, and that's kind of taken up. That's sort of it's been a rediscovery of old loves that, in the context of this conversation and the thoughts of retirement, I think is interesting, because it was, on my wife's and my part, a very deliberate time in our lives where we're like, okay, we want to do this because the kids are around and they're not going to be. So in some sense, retirement wise, we're sacrificing some future wealth here in exchange for this intense time together that we're going to have. But additionally, it was, as a tax preparer, I just seen a lot of my clients look forward for this entire career to what's going to be supposedly the promised land of retirement. And they get there and they kind of don't know what to do with themselves. They're, on the night tea with some knobby-kneed friends playing golf in Tucson, wondering whether this was all about. And so part of that France trip for us was a deliberate effort to reconnect with some earlier parts of ourselves. For my wife, it was art and photography. For me, it was writing books and reading. And kind of started practicing that in France. I started keeping a journal, started publishing some food writing in local and national publications. Mary Jo started a blog. And now we've arrived at this point where we're on the cusp of retirement, but not really seeing it as retirement. We're seeing it as the stepping into this new phase rather than kind of stepping away from everything that we've done previously.
Well, there's so much I want to respond to there. I'm trying to figure out what first. But so first of all, you mentioned the dual brain, and I think it's probably pretty rare for someone to be a tax preparer and a food writer. I don't know if there are too many of those double threats out there. So your writing has won an award that just sounds like it's probably one of the best awards because it's got James Beard's name in it.
So the James Beard Awards they're kind of the Oscars of the food world. So chefs, restaurants, bar programs, as well as food journalists and people in food media are kind of have an annual ceremony similar to the Emmys or the Oscars. And winning a James Beard is sort of the pinnacle, other than maybe, a Pulitzer or a National Book Award or, something like that. But in the food world, a James Beard Award is sort of the highest honor you can get. And one of the articles I wrote for actually for a local publication won the James Beard. It's called the M.F.K. Fisher Distinguished Writing Award. So it's the award for the most sort of literary successful writing of the year, of that particular year. That was back in 2019.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was that for the Minneapolis Star Tribune? Or?
No, that was actually for Artful Living magazine, which is based locally, although it is more of a national magazine. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And you've also written for Food and Wine, the Washington Post.
Correct.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I live in Los Angeles, and the most famous food writer here I can think of, he passed away. But did you know Jonathan Gold?
I did not know him, but everybody knows of him.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah. No, he's a revered figure in my circle. Somebody who had an incredibly unique voice, but also did really incredible work to seek out and publicize the kinds of chefs, cooks, food people who didn't normally get the kind of press that the national press gives.
Yeah, it seemed like he would go to, I mean, I don't know if he went to Tito's Tacos, but seemed like someone that would go to a place like
Literally,
that.
exactly. Like little strip mall places where somebody in the back room was doing something special and he would call this out in a really cool way. Yeah.
Right. And maybe you had a bit of that experience when you went to France, and it was like a gradual acceptance into the wine world. I don't know if I saw a movie once about how Napa Valley emerged, and at first the French were sort of like, who are these people? This
Uh-huh.
isn't who would normally be good at wine.
Right,
And
right.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that the French wine world versus the American wine world is interesting. In France, it's so much a part of the culture
Yeah.
that it's actually remarkably unpretentious. But certainly where
Oh.
we were in the Languedoc region of southern France, so it's down south near the Mediterranean, very just across the Rhone River from Provence. But it's an agricultural, it's a second poorest region in France, and the wine component to life there is very simple and straightforward. It has a lot to do with making wine, with tending grapes, with being farmers,
Hmm.
and then wine just naturally integrates into food and meals as kind of a part of life. But I think really the food and the wine there are both considered much more agricultural products, as opposed to a Bordeaux or a Burgundy, where it's also considered sort of, you're making art, and high art that's also going to be very expensive. But even there, that's really integrated into a community, into a landscape. And sometimes I've been to Napa a couple of times, and sometimes I kind of refer to it as like wine Disney. It's like this thing came in out of nowhere, and they
Yeah.
started, sort of like they slapped a grid down in the high desert and called it Phoenix. And I feel like to some extent, they did a little of that with Napa. I
Yeah.
mean, the climate was right, but there's so much money there, and it feels just a little bit artificial in a way
Right.
that
Right.
our experience in southern France did not.
Well, and to the point where there's now a place in Central California, south of Napa, by I don't know 4 hours, called Paso Robles. That is now
Yes, sure. Yep.
okay. I know people who say we go there because it's not as snobby as Napa.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Actually, interesting in Paso Robles, it's kind of interesting because there's a wine culture there. They were very popular in the end of the last century, but 90s, 80s, 90s, I think early 2000s. I don't know the exact era, but they call themselves the Rhone Rangers,
Oh.
and they were actually trying to recreate in California the types of wine that was made in the Southern Rhone Valley, which are these very specific grapes that are the grapes that we were working with when we were in our village as well. It's Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvedre primarily. They're referred to often as sort of shorthand as GSM wines. And
Oh.
and so there is this winemaking community that actually was inspired by the Rhone, by the French style of making wine in the Rhone, and they tried to import that mentality into the Paso Robles area in a very successful way, I think.
Okay, so I could go on with wine. I will say this. In our happy retiree research, we found that a lot of the happy retirees we surveyed drank white wine and gin. So I was just curious, could you speak to why they might be drinking white wine and what that might have to do with happiness or healthiness?
That's a really interesting question, and no, I don't. I mean, there's been some research showing that red wine can lead to longevity because of the resveratrol. But the only here's what I would say. I think of white wine and gin as sociable drinks.
Oh, okay.
They're
Yeah.
right. And so they're not something that you go off necessarily and go get plastered by yourself in a basement somewhere.
Yeah.
And I wonder if maybe there would be a relationship there with the fact that those tend to get drunk in company with other people. And I think there's a whole lot of research that shows that, having good people in your life and having good relationships in your life really leads both to happiness and longevity.
That I think you might be onto something, and that leads me to another topic that I wanted to speak with you about, because I know one of your core pursuits is tennis. You've always played and you continue to play. Um,
Mhm.
did you ever read that there was a study that came out from the Copenhagen City Heart um, in Denmark that I think it was around 2017 where the results came out, and it was saying that tennis extended life by 9.7 years for people
Yes,
who played.
absolutely. I've just run into that in the last couple of years, and it seems like now that's a little bit all over now.
Oh,
That's being confirmed over and over.
okay,
That
okay,
racket sports in general, and tennis of all of them, the most so, tends to increase your lifespan. And again, they do believe that part of the reason for that is that you have to play with somebody else. So there's a
right.
built-in community. But then there's also, I think, something about judging the flight of the ball that actually kind of keeps a part of your brain developed that would not stay developed otherwise. It's like this spatial awareness or whatever. So I think it also has to do with like keeping your brain active in a good way. And then obviously there's the exercise itself,
Really?
but yeah, I've heard the same thing, and yeah.
I assumed the social aspect and the exertion and even maybe that short, quick bursts were better than long plodding exercise. But the judging of the ball I hadn't thought of. The judging of the ball might help extend life.
Yep, there's some part of the brain in the back of the brain that actually stays more developed, and that I think can combat the effects of dementia or Alzheimer's if that stays sort of stimulated.
Wow.
And yeah, badminton, table tennis, all those where you're either there's it's like a multi-part math equation. It's coming at me. I'm swinging this fast. I'm moving this fast toward the ball. All of that spatial awareness apparently is good for our brains.
Wow. Okay. Well, how often do you play? Now I wanna crank up my tennis.
Yeah, I know. Honestly, I try to play 2 or 3 times a week when I can. During tax season, that's not possible. Tax season is a grind.
Yeah.
But when I can, I like to try. I would love, looking forward to the, decades to come. I would sure love to be playing 2 or 3 times a week for the next, for the rest of my life.
So I know you don't want to retire in the classic sense, but do you think you'll just do less tax preparation or you'll stop completely with
That
that?
that would be the goal. Yeah, that would be the goal. It's fulfilling enough, but it's still a little bit of checking a box of, this is what I have to do to pay all the bills.
Right.
And writing at this point is not doing that. If you help me become a bestseller, maybe that will change. But
I can
but for the
guarantee
time
it.
being, that is what I need to make sure that we're financially stable. But yeah, I think retirement, quote unquote, would involve a transition slowly away from that and into, the writing and collaborative sort of creative work with my spouse, with my wife, Mary Jo. That would be the ideal, is if we didn't have to have that early grind, in the first half of our year, and could do more of that kind of thing over the full year. That would be wonderful. But I'm not unhappy with my situation now, and I think I could extend it for a very long time. And there is something about being engaged professionally. I feel that's like good for you. It keeps you in touch with people, with their lives, with their stories. My tax clients are they're not friends, but they are relationships, and
Yeah.
it's remarkably intimate. I often know almost as much about them as their doctor, because if they get sick, I know about it. If they lose their job, I know about it. If they have kids, I know about it. If they lose kids, I know about it. It's a remarkably intimate thing. It seems like it's just this linear career where you got your green shade on, and you're just sort of plugging numbers in. But to do it well, you have to engage in a true relationship with your clients and be be a counselor to them, and be somebody who can talk about their lives in a way. And I actually think that and I say this a lot, I feel like my early humanities training, an ability to communicate, ability to write well, having encountered literature early, where literature is really a lot about stories of people and stories of relationships, and having that be part of how my brain works early in my life, I think is part of why I'm a good tax preparer. It's, anybody really can memorize the tax code and apply it. That's not that hard to do. But dealing with people is hard to do. And a lot of
Yeah.
what you do as a tax preparer is deal with people. They're terrified of the IRS. You need to help calm them and deal with anxiety. And again, people's lives, there are dark periods in everybody's life. And if you're working with somebody for most of their adult life, you're going to go through those dark periods with them, and being able to empathize and being able to communicate is really, really important.
I don't imagine that a lot of tax preparers have this same wisdom that you're talking about, or are good with people. Maybe I'm wrong. I just assumed they were good at math.
I can confirm that 100%, because
Okay, okay.
again, I go to the annual continuing education, and that is not an exciting room full of people.
Yeah.
But B, I get a lot of my clients who have left a previous preparer, and so I get feedback that this is not how things were with my other guy.
Yeah.
That you can speak English, you can talk to me, you can you can translate IRS speak into plain English and that kind of thing. Yeah, for sure, for sure.
And you mentioned, you'd like to eventually do more creative work with your wife, Mary Jo. What does that
hmm
entail? What kind of creative work?
To be determined, but we collaborated. So she also published a book this year. So my book
Oh,
comes out on July 9th. Her book came out on May 1st. Her book is an art and photography book based on a really cool project that she's done since 2012. On January 1st of 2012, she started taking one photo a day of a natural object found around
really?
her, organized or laid against a white background. And she has never once missed a day. So that's 4,500 and I don't know how many straight images. Never missed a day. Didn't miss a Christmas. Didn't miss a birthday. Didn't miss the date of her dad's death. Every single day she's done this, and just published a book about that project. So it's the photos, which are beautiful, but it's also 6 or 7 essays about what she's learned about the creative process in the course of this creative pursuit
Wow.
of hers.
What's the name
Yeah,
of
it's
her
super
book?
cool. It's called Still, Still, The Art of Noticing. And her project is called Still. So she has a blog called Still, and that stillblog.net. And that is where she posts every single day. She's also active on Instagram, but sort of the place where she posts with the gallery of her images is on her blog. And, so in the process of her doing this and me basically kind of slowly establishing a writing career over the last decade, we've been moving in a fun way in the same direction and kind of toward each other. And so I can see that collaboration taking the form of writing a book together, or maybe even doing some teaching together or some appearances together. But we've already kind of done that, and I just think it would be more of the same. We've come to a lot of our conclusions by talking a lot. We spend most evenings, we have dinner together, and we sit on the couch or we sit on the deck and we talk. We don't have a TV, and we don't generally we like movies but don't often watch them. And so there's very much a daily interaction that I think has been really healthy for the relationship. But it also means we're very much on each other's wavelength,
Yeah.
and that leads naturally to a desire to collaborate in some official way as well.
Well, and that leads me to something I wanted to ask you about, because when I had mentioned what is a perfect day before, before today's interview, you were kind of giving me some information about it. And after you got enough sleep and got 3 or 4 hours of writing done, as the day wound on, around 4, you strap on an apron and cook a meal that you share with Mary Jo, with a bottle of wine, maybe a petite sirah, maybe not. And but then you finish the night with good conversation. If it's cold, you sit by the fire. If it's not cold, you sit outside on the deck and listen to birds and frogs.
Yep, it's
So I'm
correct.
listening to this and I'm just thinking, am I a bad husband? Because like sometimes I want to look at my phone, you know.
Right?
You have something riveting to talk about every single night.
It's not always riveting, but it is the baseline. I would say it's like the how would I put it? It's the baseline of our life. It establishes the rhythm of our life. And so no, it's not always it's scintillating conversation. Sometimes it's sitting and looking at each other, and playing footsie, and not much gets talked about. So
Okay.
I don't want to oversell what this is, but what I do think is, and this goes back to the idea we talked about earlier of, when we went to France, this was a deliberate attempt to be like with our kids and in our kids' lives. And one of the things that I feel really strongly about parenting, which I also feel strongly about as in a marriage, is, it's really hard to bond with your kid between 6 and 8 p.m. after school and sports and before bedtime. Like,
Yeah.
because they're not always ready and you're not always ready.
Yeah.
And that can be hard to squeeze in. And to really have a relationship like that with anybody, but certainly with family members, you have to be there all the time. And then you have to be there when that person is ready to do the bonding with you.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of time. And that's, in answer to some of your questions in that sort of preparatory questionnaire, I found them very interesting, and they triggered some of these thoughts, which is, you know, every yes you say is a no to something else. And so I think a lot of people are feel extremely busy, but they also sort of embrace busyness because it's in some ways, in some contexts, it's an easier way to live because you don't have to go very deep. You don't have to think hard thoughts. You don't have to wonder about yourself. You don't have to, work toward real self-knowledge. And so I think while we complain about busyness, we also really embrace busyness in a lot of ways. And I think there's something important about being a parent, being a spouse that requires that you be less busy, that you do fewer things and you say yes to fewer things. Because then hopefully you're there when that moment comes that you can't control and you can't schedule it, that your kid really needs to talk and you're there.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel like the couch time is with Mary Jo. It's not always great. It's not always super interesting, but it's dependable. And there's a space in most days when we can talk something through if something needs to be talked through, whether it's logistic, lifestyle, or emotional and relationship wise. So
Yeah.
anyway, I found those questions of yours very interesting, and
Oh,
it really led to reminding me a lot of this kind of thinking, which I feel pretty strongly about.
well, the way you answered them reminded me that you're a writer because you almost made me realize some of my questions were more profound than I knew. You had a more wisdom than I do. I'm just yeah, and I love that so you basically create space for the bonding to happen, but you don't expect it to happen, and it's fine
Correct.
if it doesn't. That
Absolutely.
because I think if there's that pressure there, it may not happen. At least for me,
That's right. It's really hard. I mean, you've got like, I'm feeling it more now with my kids because one lives in San Francisco. My son is at NYU, and I'm getting less time with them. And I'm feeling that urge to cram the bonding or the deep talks into those smaller windows of time. And it's harder and it feels forced and it
Yeah,
doesn't work as well. But I think the flip side is that you have to embrace the fact that there are going to be these parts of your life that are inactive and almost a little bit boring. You have to be willing to invite some boredom into your life
right.
because it's in the midst of that boredom that suddenly this moment arrives, and it may be the moment that you needed to happen for you to get a message, to send a message to your kid or your spouse or a friend or whatever.
Yeah. That reminds me, my brother-in-law was going to be watching his daughter, an extended time that he didn't normally. And he was asking his wife, I feel like I should do something with her. What should I do? His wife just said, just be bored with her.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be some, and I'm watching this children's show, Daniel Tiger, because my son's almost 2. And
Mhm.
there's a song they have that's like, it doesn't matter what we do, I just like to do it with you, or so, something like that. And it seems like
100%,
exactly what you're
100%.
saying. Yeah.
I've actually heard a really good line. I heard, and it's particularly good, I think, for your stage of life with young kids, toddlers. The best thing, the best way to be a parent with a young child is to sit in one place and look comfortable.
Oh,
So
I,
don't look at your phone. Don't look like you want to be somewhere else, but you don't have to be doing anything. Just look comfortable, and they will want to be a part of that. They will feel comfortable in that setting if you look like you're happy to be there.
oh my gosh, I can definitely sit somewhere and look comfortable. That's definitely within my range. Okay, thanks for that advice.
Yeah, yeah. I thought it was a really cool thing.
Sometimes when I'm just sitting there and I'm just there and I'm watching, he'll come up to me and like laugh, and then he'll run off and play with his
Yep.
truck, and then he'll come back or whatever,
Or that's when they want to cuddle, or they want to come in for a head
Oh,
rub, and those are the best times. Those are two
oh,
incredible times.
those moments are just those don't come enough.
And I
Okay,
think you can sense, I mean, as you're interacting and spending time with other parents of young children, I'm sure you sense that there are some parents who give off an anxious energy. And they often do what Mary Jo and I call parenting out loud, where it's performative. They're performing the act of parenting to prove that they're good parents to everybody except the children themselves.
yeah,
And
right,
I really feel like if I can sense that anxious energy, the kids can, and
yeah.
they sense that their parents aren't comfortable. And so I think there's really something important about being okay with just being there and knowing that your kid's going to be okay with that. And the fact that you're there and you're together, that's good enough in most cases.
I have to be careful. I have that anxious energy. Yesterday, my
Sure.
son was getting too close to one of the cats that tends to swipe, and I went diving across the room, like, and my wife was like, "Calm down." I was monitoring the situation. My son's probably like, "Who's this freak that's
Right, right, right.
jump and land on the?" Oh man, yeah. I wanted to, so this is something that my boss Wes Moss, he has his own podcast called Retire Sooner, so I've studied a lot of his research. And anyway, we've talked a lot about earning versus time with family, and how happiness tends to increase up to a certain income, and then there's a plateau effect. But
Yep.
you really explained something in a way I don't think we've ever talked about. You almost talked about spending time with your kids and friends and family almost like compounding interest. You you could have made more money, but you chose to invest in that time with the thought that it will compound and then later pay off even more. Did I say that right?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, and I haven't thought of it in that specific term of compounding interest. But yes, in both cases, you're building something that is going to have a payoff later. And if you're building an economic or financial nest egg, then that is going to buy you freedom and fulfillment, or and ease, or whatever later in life. But you need to invest in other things. And part of this idea of practicing for retirement was really an investment of establishing a nest egg of a couple skill sets for Mary Jo and me that we could build on, and then that would pay off later. And I think that time that we deliberately chose to spend with our children and do fewer things and earn less money as a result was investing in a different kind of wealth, which is deep relationships that absolutely pay off later, but it's a very long game. And often it seems like it's not going where you want, especially when the kid's a teenager, won't talk to you and won't get off his freaking phone, right?
Right, right.
I mean, yeah, it's a long game, but yes, it's very much the idea of that being an investment as well, I think is a really, really cool way to think of it.
Well, it's just such a cool it puts it into perspective because the way we've sort of talked about it before is the goal of how much you should make, and then maybe take your foot off the gas and look elsewhere, but
Yep.
you really shine the light on that love and family aspect of it. So you figured out what you thought you needed, and then you sort of focused on the relationships.
Part of the thinking here was um, watching as a small business owner, you end up talking to a lot of other small business owners, and you have, their coaches and so on. And there's a lot of talk about, make the money, make the money, make the money, because you can always give it away later.
Right.
You can do great things with it, and you can't do great things those great things if you don't have the money. So in some sense, the foundation is to make enough money. And that never entirely made sense to me, because while you're making, again, if you think of your life as a whole, everybody says the biggest part of their life is their family. But if you spent most of your working years away from them making money, and then now you're going to spend your retirement with them not around nearly as often, but also now concerned with managing all that money and possibly even giving some of it away, it seems as if you spent too much of your life thinking about money is the way I would put it.
Okay.
And so, I just feel like I feel as if there is, yes, a problem, an epidemic of too many people retiring or dying without enough money. I think there is a parallel epidemic of people dying with too much money. If you die with too much money, it means you spent too much of your life making and saving money. And I think what can often happen is that, and I'm sure you see this with people you interview, you get into accumulation mode, and you watch your net worth grow, and it is really cool. And it's full of all these promises about what the future is going to hold. And at some point, that what should have been a means to an end, which is money buys the rest of the life that you want.
Mm-hmm.
The increasing net worth becomes the end in itself.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of my clients get to a point where they can't stop and go into spending mode. They are always in accumulation mode.
Yeah.
And I feel as if that is a waste, and that what's not recognized is, again, every yes is a no to something else. All those yeses to the opportunities to make and save more money were an indirect way of saying no to other things that they're now impoverished in. Their saving muscle is strong, but their spending muscles and their relationship muscles have atrophied. And I think part of what we try to do is look at it holistically and say, what are all of the things that we're investing in, not just money, so that when we get to the point where we don't necessarily need to make any more money, we have an infrastructure of pleasure and fulfillment and creativity and relationships that is going to pay off for this third act of our life.
Yeah, that's such a great way to put it. I think that accumulation mode is so hard to turn off. Once it's almost like you need to turn it on for survival. It's really hard to turn off. I see it with
Really
my
hard.
parents. They, things were difficult when I was little in terms of having enough money, and they got so focused, and now they have enough money, but it's hard for them to not feel guilty when they spend it.
Exactly. I agree. Yeah. But if you ask them explicitly, everybody will say, well, no, it was never just about the money.
Right.
And yet it becomes about the money because that's the habit that you got into that you can't somehow break.
Yeah. And the hat trick I've pulled off is I can be focused in accumulation mode and not watch my net worth grow. So I don't know how I figured out how to do that. So I'll have to write.
Congratulations, Ryan. That's quite an accomplishment.
Thank you. So you mentioned you have 2 kids. Is that what you said?
Correct. Yeah. My son is just finished his sophomore year at NYU. He's 20, and my daughter is 26, and she is in San Francisco. She's got a job in design, basically.
Okay, so this brings up a topic that we also have studied with some of our happy retirees. The happiest ones report that they live near at least one of their, or at least half of their adult children. So how do you manage the distance in that sense?
It's a dilemma. We have part of what Mary Jo's creative project is very centered in place, right? It's about the bioregion that surround us. My writing is very much about the Great Lakes North and the food culture there, and Mediterranean France. And now we've got 2 kids in 2 other places, and we're really, I think our conversation, and I agree very much with what you said, which is I feel like it's really important to be present with family for long stretches rather than just visiting over the holidays. And we happen to currently, at least, we happen to be in a position where we actually like our kids and they seem to like us. and I'm going to take advantage of that as long
Yeah.
as it lasts. So,
Milk that.
so right, exactly. So if they both end up on opposite coasts, that's going to be tough, and we don't know what to do. But it's not something that we're taking lightly. I do think my son is gonna. He really likes Minnesota. He likes
Oh,
the outdoors. He likes sort of the quiet bittersweetness of Minnesota and its seasons. So I think he'll come back. My daughter is very much a California girl. She loves the ocean. She loves the beach. She loves San Francisco, loves Northern Cal. And so,
yeah.
um, I, if I had to guess, I would say that, we would hopefully have our son near us, and this would be the home base for our daughter as well. Like, this is where you come back to when you want to stay for a while, you want to visit, or for holidays or whatever. And so we'd at least be close to one of the two. And then ideally, I think we would also try to spend a little bit of time in Mediterranean France, because that's just such a fulfilling part of the world for me. I feel very much, there's a part of me that's missing when I'm not there. And so I really like being there, because I feel like there's this aspect of who I am that is activated when I'm there that is not when I'm anywhere else.
Right. And
Yeah.
when you're there, do you feel at a certain point you feel like ready to come back to Minnesota, or you could be there all the time?
Rarely. I mean, I shouldn't say that. France is an interesting thing for me, because my first encounter with it was in Paris in my 20s. And what it turned into was that, as a kid from the Midwest, a not very interesting suburban upbringing, suddenly I have this guy walking the streets of Paris. And I really felt as if I were a different person there, and that I wanted to be that person. I didn't want to be the person that I'd been for 22 years leading up to that experience. Um, and so there's still an element of that to being in France. This is the Steve that I like. I love that. I love this Steve.
You like French Steve.
However,
Okay.
yeah, I do. I really like French Steve. On the other hand, it's a way of also like not accepting yourself.
Oh,
I
right.
mean, most of the time I'm here. And so if I'm spending all my time here wishing I were somewhere else because I'm a different person there's something problematic about that. And I guess what I would say is I don't know the answer, but I'm very actively wrestling with it right now, because it
Yeah.
feels as if being here, this is my life. This is where I am. This is where I spend most of my days. It doesn't make sense to be here and constantly be wishing I were somewhere else and was someone else.
Right.
So trying to understand how being in this place is somewhere that I can find like some self-acceptance and some peace and some acceptance of this being my home, is I'm in the middle of that process. And in fact, that may be the next thing I write about, is having found what felt like the perfect place for me and a place where I was my best self. And then leaving that place to come back to a place that I've always had mixed feelings about. And how do you come to a form of self-acceptance when you do that? And again, I don't know the answer. I'm working it out and wrestling with it in real time.
Well, I think how aware you are that it's a thing you need to work out is probably ahead of where a lot of people are. And if you so you would sort of like French Steve to also exist in Minnesota. You like that
I would,
Steve.
I think what it would be more like is that I need to learn to appreciate the Steve that's not in France.
Okay, okay. Yeah.
There's like there's a little bit of a more of a boring element to this kid who grew up in the suburbs of Minnesota. And yet that's who my wife married. That's who my kids grew up with. Like, other people have accepted that version of me. Why am I struggling to accept that version of me? But part of it is actually living here. And I think it has tangentially to do with retirement, because I also think a lot of people, the dream of retirement is you're going to go somewhere else. You're going to go retire somewhere else, right?
Yeah,
You're going
yeah.
to go to the coast. You're going to go south. You're going to go to Florida. You're going to go to, North Carolina. You're going to go to New York City. And I've always mistrusted that a little bit, because I feel as if who you are is who you've been over all these years building up to the time that you then leave. And when you go to that new place at the end of your life that wasn't a part of the rest of your life, you're leaving a part of yourself behind, and you're not really somebody whole in that new place either. Unless it's a place that, like you're George O'Keeffe, and you discover New Mexico, and it's clearly just this deep, deep part of your vision of life and where you want to be and so on. But the idea of escaping somewhere else, I feel as if, I don't know, there's something problematic about it that I can't put words to.
Yeah.
But so what I'm saying, I think, is that part of what I feel my job is, or my struggle is going to be in the coming years, is I don't feel like, other than France, where I found this just weird unicorn of a place
Yeah.
that, that fulfills so much of what I love about life. Um, it's, yes, I could go move to LA, or I could move to, Big Sur, and it would be physically beautiful and it'd be dramatic. And it would feel as if that was a little bit of a cop out. I feel as if I need to find a way to accept the person who's here in this place, because this is the place that's made me who I am, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah, you should be able to be you along Turtle Lake, Minnesota. You don't rather than having to be on the Mediterranean or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. In theory, that should be true. But it's hard because it is undramatic, and in theory, that should also be true for Des Moines and, and Fargo, North Dakota. If
Right.
that's the place that formed you, in theory, you should be able to find a way to be fulfilled, because people are fulfilled all over the world in the places that they were born, in Karachi and Paris, but also, in
Yeah.
tiny villages in Namibia,
Right.
so but there is, there's this strong impetus, I think, to associate retirement with either travel or with going somewhere else. And I guess I'm here saying I mistrust that, and I'm in the process of trying to figure out why exactly.
Yeah, I think that might relate to, I mean, because some people think with retirement that just not working anymore, running from the work, they'll be happy automatically. And then they realize they have to deal with who they are and what they want to actually do. And,
Exactly.
you know,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And they haven't done the work, and that takes years to figure that out. And if you're starting it at 65, you don't have much time left, to figure that out.
Yeah, that's why we're always hoping people will get a start on that before so they can kind
Yep.
of go into it, instead of
Exactly.
starting from stop,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Yep. And I would
Well,
say that's a little bit of what Mary Jo's and my couch time at night is.
oh,
That's
okay.
that's integrating that kind of thing into our relationship and our lives earlier, so that when we get to retirement, we've already had all these conversations.
Yeah.
Instead of the day you retire, you sit across a table from your spouse with a cup of coffee and going, "Who the hell is this? And do I even like them anymore?"
Right.
And it sounds like a joke, but I think it happens a lot.
Yeah.
There was that episode of yours recently where the Marine retired and announced to his spouse that they had enough money to retire, and she was horrified
Yeah,
and said, "No, no, no,
exactly.
no, you can retire, but you got to go get another job, dude."
Right.
And I think that really does actually happen a lot. And it's because, again, you feel like the retirement is going to be the answer to your problems, and it's not. It's just a new stage of life that you enter with all the same problems and all the same issues that you had leading up to it. And so I really like the idea of retirement as thinking of it not as an escape or a new phase, but as an extension of everything that has come before.
Do you think this relates, because you said something really powerful, about muddling through and real, like you saw that your son had some anxiety and that sort of forced you to admit that you did. And in a way that helped you get past the ego of maybe saying, I don't have anxiety, because you almost chose to do that because you realized you weren't doing your son any favors. Do you want to talk about
Yeah,
that a little bit?
I think that was another great question that really released something. And I think the question was, are you an example that people should follow? And my first instinct was, no, I'm just like anybody else. I've tried to figure it out and failed half the time and maybe succeeded some of the time. And but if I'm proud of myself in a way, I guess that that I could offer as an example to follow, it was that moment of being sort of what's called. Have you heard of the term a transitional character?
No.
It's a person in the genealogy of a family who says the buck stops here. Like
Okay.
there's brokenness, there's sometimes abuse, there's mental health issues, there's financial mismanagement, and the transitional character is the person in the line of descent in that family who says, nope, not going to happen on my watch. And that character, I'm not claiming that I am that character, but that character is something that excites me. I think that's a beautiful thing to be able to be that. And often it involves accepting what's not so great about yourself, or what's not so great about what you've inherited from your family. And I feel as if that, I had this little bit of denial. I had this blind spot. But yeah, I was riddled with anxiety in many ways that I covered up very, very well. But then suddenly starting to watch my son struggle with it, having my wife say, this isn't coming out of nowhere, resisting, and then at some point saying, I'm actively right now modeling what my son is going to do with himself and how he feels about himself. And if we're saying, Joe, you have anxiety, but Dad sure doesn't. That's when in fact I do. That's a way of saying I don't actually think it's okay because I'm not willing to admit it about myself.
Right.
And so the minute I said, I do, and I have to deal with it, I feel like that was a transitional moment that was really important and very undramatic and not very romantic, but it was a letting go of ego, and it was also a way of accepting that it's not just what I actively say I think you should do, son, as your parent, and I'm conveying all this wisdom to you. Really, the best, I feel like what you're mostly doing as a parent is modeling behavior.
Yeah.
And if, like I said, if I'm saying, no, it's okay, Joe, to have anxiety, and we're going to work with you, and it's not a problem, it's nothing to be embarrassed about, and yet I'm acting as if I'm embarrassed about it within myself.
Yeah.
That's sending the opposite message for what I'm saying.
And a more powerful
and
message than the words, I would think.
For sure. I would hope so. I would hope
Yeah.
so. Yeah. I do feel like it was a letting go of ego to some extent, and that there was fear and love in conflict in that incident. The fear was fear of admitting this about myself, fear of being less than perfect, or I'm a perfectionist, and and so there was a fear of admitting that I was something less than what I hoped the world saw me as.
Yeah.
Waging war with love for my son, and wanting that and wanting to be able to express that in a way that he felt. And I feel like it was a moment of the love winning out over fear, and the winning that battle felt like a really important and an important turning point in my life, and an important episode, and something that, again, if I were to say, should you follow my example in anything, I don't know that there are many parts of my life that I would say, yes, absolutely, you should follow this example. But to the extent that anybody can let love win out over fear, I would say, yes, absolutely, that's an example to follow.
I can tell you're a perfectionist because, you're in France and you're happy, and you're still thinking, I should be able to be happy when I'm not here. I mean, some people would probably not even get to that. They would just think, I'm happy, end of story. But you want to set the bar higher for yourself. And I wonder too, if that ever, I know for me, does that ever prevent you from writing because you think, oh, this thing I'm working on isn't good enough, so I'm just gonna.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason it took me 8 years to write this book, Ryan.
Yeah. And I wonder if that drew you to the tax preparation, because it's more like, I did it, it's done,
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it very much fulfilled that perfectionism. There's a right answer and a wrong answer. And that makes tax preparation easier for me. And that did definitely make writing harder for me. And really, on the subject of ego, I really feel as if there was also a turning point in the evolution of this book, which was at some point I realized that I didn't need to become a better writer to write the book that I wanted. I needed to become a better human being.
Oh,
and and that really involved also I have always loved beautiful surface writing, so very eloquent, poetic, kind of lyrical surface writing. And I wanted to write that way because that's what I admired. And I got to a point in writing this book where this book doesn't need any more of that. I don't need to get better at that. I need to get better at things that I'm currently bad at.
Right.
And I need to get over myself and admit that I'm bad at them. And then I need to get better at them. And one of those was how to tell a story compellingly, where maybe not every scene is gonna blow your socks off when you read it as beautifully lyrical writing, but it is in service to the reader who wants to be given a story that they're interested in and that's intriguing to them. It makes them want to turn the pages. And so there was also a simultaneous, and this was really about the same era as dealing with anxiety. In fact, I think the two are related. In fact, I think anxiety and perfectionism are very related,
Oh,
right?
very much. Yeah.
Perfectionism is a way of holding off anxiety, because if everything is perfect, then I got nothing to worry about.
Right.
So yeah, there was also this getting over myself and getting over ego, and accepting that there are things I'm good at and things I'm not good at, and starting from a place of accepting that first, and then working on the things that I'm not so good at. But the first thing you have to do is admit it.
Yeah, I was listening to Ira Glass, who hosts This American Life. He was saying, so he hosts his show and writes it, but he's also the boss. So he'll procrastinate the writing by working on the
Yeah.
business. It's
Yeah.
like, well, that
Yep.
has to get done, so you can kind of
Right.
justify it, but it's the same
That's
thing.
like, yeah, I do think that we very often will pick the that's another way of talking about busyness, as we were talking about earlier. It's easy to pick the busy thing because you can get that done. You can check it off your list, but that's not the important thing. That's not the thing that probably really should get done.
Right.
But it's, it's the thing that you can get done soon enough that you can check it off your to-do list. And that feels like you've accomplished something, but really what it's done is deferred some harder work that probably was more important.
Exactly. Where I live is never cleaner than when I have some project I'm trying to not work on.
Yes, yes. I've never looked into more possible software solutions than when I was stuck in my book. I can tell you that for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay, so Steve, tell us, give me the name of your book again and tell us where people can
Yeah.
find you, all that.
Yeah, great. So the title of the book is A Season for That, Lost and Found in the Other Southern France. It is available anywhere you buy books. It's available for pre-order right now. When we're talking, it will be published on July 9th. It's
Okay.
available at Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and it will be at all local bookstores. It is the story of that time in France that we talked about, where our family went over there. We immersed ourselves into a tiny little winemaking village in southern France, and that sort of external acceptance is half the story, and the other half of the story is this attempt to move toward some self-acceptance internally for me as well. So I'm pretty active on Instagram, and I'm at SJR Hoffman on Instagram, and my writer's website, where you can get some of my other writing on food and wine and the northern North America, is just www.sjrhoffman.com.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I can't thank you enough for being here. You make me want to get my taxes done and drink wine and be a better person. So you pretty much hit all the spots.
It was a blast. As I said, it doesn't. Let's talk about retirement. It doesn't necessarily sound like let's all get super excited about it, and yet it's a very exciting topic to me. And as you can see, I think it encompasses so much of the rest of life, and a lot of thoughts about what makes a good life. And I just really, really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Same here. Well, I think the problem is we need a new word for retirement, but we don't have one yet. So we're doing our best.
If you come up with it, let me know and I'll pass on the word.
Okay.